Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. Sorry about that mistake in the countdown timer on that video, but we are at the top of the hour. So let's go ahead and get started today because we are going to be talking about messaging for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which I'm sure we're all super excited to hear about. It's a really important topic in all of our work. So here are our goals for today's session. We want to make sure that you know our key and supporting messages about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. We've got a few of them, and we have this possibly overwhelming amount of messages to give you more flexibility. The amount of messages is going to require more discipline in knowing which messages to use at which time. So we also want you to leave this session knowing how to choose which messages to use. Last but not least, we want to introduce you to some supportive quotes that we have and how you can use these statements effectively. Support is building for a carbon price, and you should feel confident in using it. It's impactful and it keeps the conversation fresh. So let's meet our speakers. Leslie, then Morgan, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Leslie Beatty. I'm CCL's Director of Marketing. Part of our job in marketing is to provide the messaging structure that allows us to communicate clearly and consistently, but also that gives us the flexibility that we need to have productive conversations with folks that we're talking to. We also produce materials and resources to support this. During today's talk, I'll be providing insights from some focus group type research we did on this messaging around the Energy Innovation Act.
Hi, everyone. I just want to let everybody know that today is actually Leslie's birthday. She cares so much about getting this right that she's here with us today. So please make sure to wish her happy birthday in the chat. And thank you so much, Leslie, for joining us on your special day. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Morgan Mchugh, and I'm CCL's Legislative Coordinator on the Government Affairs team in DC. Today, I'll be giving the political context of each of the key messaging points. I'm hoping to give you a little insight into what we know about members of Congress and how to best approach policy messaging the Energy Innovation Act with the political aspects in mind.
And hello, I'm Sara Wanous. I'm a research coordinator with CCL based in Washington, D.C. I'll be giving some of the context on some of the sources of some of our talking points and additional context on the research landscape behind them today. So we're going to be starting with talking about the Energy Innovation Act messaging. So let's start with a little bit of a reminder about how the Energy Innovation Act works.
What is a carbon fee and dividend? And how does it help solve climate change? Burning fossil fuels causes carbon pollution, which traps heat and warms our planet to dangerous levels. To stabilize our climate, we need to stop carbon pollution. How? By changing the rules to the game. Right now, carbon pollution is free for everyone. With a carbon fee and dividend, fossil fuel companies pay a fee when they pollute the air. Since most companies like saving money, they'll change their behavior to avoid the carbon fee. They will become more energy efficient or clean up their act with cleaner energy. With this policy, our carbon pollution goes down while green goods and services go mainstream. Costs for some things will go up, but for many purchases, we'll be able to substitute a greener choice. And as businesses move to greener products, they'll provide us with more affordable green options. For example, car companies will shift to producing affordable electric cars. And power companies will replace fossil fuels with clean energy. And remember that carbon fee? The money collected from fossil fuel companies goes to every American as a monthly dividend or carbon cashback. People can spend the monthly cashback however they want to, helping everyone afford the transition to green energy. When we stop burning fossil fuels, our air will be clean, our health will improve, and our climate will stabilize. All we need is a price on carbon, with the money given back to the people. Learn how you can support putting a price on carbon at cclusa.org. What is a carbon fee and dividend?
So we're going to dive into a bunch of messages today, but it's important to keep in mind that you would probably never use them all at once. We'll spend some time in the second half of the presentation talking about how to choose what you say. So why is focused messaging important? First, resonance. You want to say the most important thing first. Don't bury the lead. Note that the most important thing depends on who you are talking to. Second, remove barriers. People can only remember a short number of things. If you overwhelm them with information, they'll tune out, or they'll give up hope of ever understanding it. And third, repetition matters. The more you say something, the more people believe it. It's better to say the most important thing several times than to mix in a ton of messages. CCL is starting to talk more broadly about a price on carbon and not specifically just about carbon fee and dividend or the Energy Innovation Act. This doesn't mean that we are changing our policy support, but it is a strategic language choice for the following reasons. One, political realities. When Congress tackles climate change, we want there to be a price on carbon in the package. It may or may not be standalone legislation called the Energy Innovation Act, and we need some flexibility. Two, we want to use common vocabulary shared by other people who are talking about the same policy that we are. For example, Senator Mitt Romney uses the phrase carbon tax and dividend. We want to reach a broader group of people who are supportive. And three, we can leverage much broader support for our policy. There's a lot of supportive comments from important people for a price on carbon or a carbon tax. So using this terminology will help us reach a broader audience and expand support. While we are reviewing messages specifically for the Energy Innovation Act, these messages will also apply when you are talking about a price on carbon. You'll see some statements of support for a price on carbon interspersed throughout this presentation.
Okay, so let's get started. We're going to review the 4 key messages of the Energy Innovation Act, and for each of these, we're going to start with the main message and then dive down into supporting messages with a little bit of context about how these messages came to be. Okay, so here are our 4 leading messages for the Energy Innovation Act. These are designed to be broad. They're also designed with the audience in mind. Here is consider a public audience that's concerned about climate change, but may not know anything about climate policy. These benefits are designed to resonate at the kitchen table with their primary concerns for any climate solutions. How do we build them? So these messages really come from a couple places. The first is the text of the bill, the Energy Innovation Act itself. The second is research and studies, and we've had some new research and studies that Sara will take us through today that helped inform the messaging. And the third is we did some focus group type research with people to see what resonated with them. We should mention that all of the studies behind the numbers can be found at energyinnovationact.org/data sources.
And let's start diving in. We'll start with the point of net zero by 2050. Here's the main message for this category of messages. The main message is, this policy will reduce America's carbon pollution by 50% by 2030, putting us on track to reach net zero by 2050. Why use these goals? They're concrete examples that get people's attention. What we're talking about is that it's fast and effective. These targets are relevant. 50% by 2030 is a Biden target, and net zero by 2050 is a global target. And you should feel confident saying these numbers, knowing that they're backed by the work of respected researchers in the field and codified in the legislative text. Resources for the Future has a reputable carbon pricing calculator that estimates how different policies will reduce carbon emissions, and their work supports that the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act reduces emissions by 50% below 2010 levels by 2050. And reaching the net zero by 2050 is outlined in the emissions reductions targets directly included in the bill. If these targets are not met, the rate of increase of the price kicks up to help us get there. Now, this is a supporting message for the point of net zero by 2050. The supporting point is, a price on carbon acts fast to reduce carbon pollution. We'll start seeing tangible results in as little as 9 months. The effectiveness of a policy is heavily determined by how soon you can start. This is a major benefit of a carbon price, that there are no complex rules to write. The Energy Innovation Act text says that the policy must be in place by 9 months after it is enacted. But the price will have an impact even before it's officially implemented, because the businesses will begin planning around it.
Here's another supporting message for net zero by 2050. A robust economy-wide price on carbon is the single most powerful tool that we can use to reduce carbon pollution. This is important to understand from a political perspective as well. America's carbon pollution is spread out among 5 key economic sectors, and a carbon price drives reductions in all of them, including industry, transportation, and buildings. We are not saying that this is the only solution. We're saying it needs to be in the solution. And to touch a little bit more on the political side of things and expand what Sara was talking about. Oh, Leslie, I think this is your slide. Go ahead.
Sure. And so the last supporting message in this bucket is carbon pricing is a tried and tested tool. More than 45 countries have already put a price on carbon pollution and started seeing strong results. We talked about this a little bit yesterday in Danny's keynote, but a carbon price is implemented by a lot of other countries around the world. And we're using it here really to reinforce that carbon pricing is a politically feasible solution so that it can be implemented with success. Sorry. And the focus group insight here is the reason that we're leading with that message, the leading message, which had 50% emissions reductions by 2030 and on the path to net zero by 2050, is because our research participants reacted much better to specifics than they did to generalities. And so this whole bucket is really talking about how a carbon price is fast and effective. But when you lead with a specific number, it really is able to capture people's attention and allow them to hook into what we're talking about.
Okay, so now we'll touch a little bit more on the political side of things. So now that President Joe Biden has re-entered the US into the Paris Climate Accord, the US and many countries alike are committed to pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And among the environmental policy landscape, there is a general understanding that if we continue to pump out emissions, temperatures will continue to rise well beyond those goals. And so we all know this. This is why a growing number of countries are making commitments to achieve carbon neutrality or net zero emissions within the next few decades. Most policymakers and scholars agree that this is an essential move in terms of climate mitigation, and it's a big task and it requires ambitious actions. Also, President Biden is pledging to reduce US greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2030 in order to reach net zero emissions economy-wide by no later than 2050. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act alone will reduce America's carbon pollution by 50% by 2030. Beyond that, we will need additional policies, and additional policies before 2030 will help us get there faster. This is also a huge talking point to emphasize when meeting with progressives. We understand what is at stake, and we support a policy that is strong enough, fast enough, and effective enough to reach the goals proved necessary.
Okay, moving on to the next bucket of messages, affordable clean energy. With this policy, the government sets the direction and businesses respond in order to provide abundant, affordable, and reliable clean energy. This talking point and its supporting points are really about technology innovation and why that's important to solve climate change. This policy drives innovation across all energy sectors and all phases of the economy, and it's going to get us to net zero faster and more affordably.
Here's the supporting point to use for the main affordable clean energy message. With this policy, the market decides what the best clean energy solutions are instead of government workers picking winners. The concept of a level playing field is critically important to many conservatives and members of Congress. When they say they want market-based solutions, this is exactly what they mean. Why does this matter? They want more, better, and efficient solutions. As for the political insight of this supporting message, it's important to understand that market-based approaches like a carbon tax or cap and trade program help reduce emissions at the lowest possible cost. 12 US states and nearly 70 other jurisdictions around the world use market-based approaches to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the US has more than 30 years of experience using market-based approaches to phase out leaded gasoline and to reduce acid rain and smog. And it's no secret that these approaches are gaining popularity amongst policymakers and businesses. In fact, the Chamber of Commerce recently updated their mission on climate change to say the Chamber supports a market-based approach to accelerate greenhouse gas emissions reductions across the US economy. We believe that durable climate policy must be made by Congress and that it should encourage innovation and investment to ensure significant emissions reductions while avoiding economic harm for businesses, consumers, and disadvantaged communities. And here's another supporting point to the main affordable clean energy message. This policy will help make America a world leader in clean energy. One, America wins. And two, it's also important to Congress and local politicians who want industry and good jobs in their communities. Politically speaking, the Energy Innovation Act checks many boxes. Markets are allowed to function, taxpayers control their own spending decisions, the government doesn't pick winners and losers, and it'll help to regain America's reputation in the climate space. Not only that, but it encourages innovation, and innovation benefits companies and it benefits people. The investment for renewables is upfront. Once you've installed wind or solar, they're very cheap to maintain. Fossil fuels are expensive upfront, but the ongoing cost of constantly buying fuel is much higher for the lifetime of a project. After installation and as price continues to fall, renewables will be much cheaper in the long term and ratepayers will ultimately be paying less. And this would also show that the US is willing to step up as a global leader and finally commit to meeting the goals outlined in the Paris Agreement, which may also influence other countries to follow suit.
Okay. And going back to that main talking point, there's a reason that it's called affordable clean energy, and that's because that's really the kitchen table benefit for folks. So most people understand that green goods to be more expensive than goods produced with fossil fuels. And when you talk about a price on carbon or a carbon tax, they immediately start to realize that things will become more expensive, and they start to worry that they're not going to be able to afford it. And so they don't necessarily see innovation itself as a benefit, but what they do see as a benefit is the assurance that there will be plenty of renewable energy and that it won't cost way more than what they currently have, such that they can continue to live their modern lifestyles.
And let's talk a little bit more about how we should know that we should feel confident in saying that the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act will result in affordable clean energy. Shown here by a study out of Colombia, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act will significantly boost investment in renewables without the government picking winners and losers, but by the businesses and investors responding to the cost of polluting. And the same study shows that the dividend payment to Americans will be more than the increased costs that Americans face as companies finance the change to renewable energy. Affordability for Americans has always been a central point of CCL's policy approach. And now we're going to move into the next bucket of talking points, which is saves lives. Our main message in this area is a price on carbon will improve the health and save lives of 4.5 million Americans over the next 50 years by reducing pollution that Americans breathe. Air pollution is worse than we previously understood. Recent research points to twice as many deaths as previously expected. Drew Shindell out of Duke testified in front of Congress that air pollution from burning fossil fuels leads to 250,000 premature deaths per year, and the U.S. is getting on track. And the U.S. getting on track to keep climate change to less than 2 degrees globally will reduce air pollution enough to cut those deaths by 40% in just a decade. Now moving into the supporting messages for the bucket of saved lives. First, we have this policy will start saving lives right away because air quality clears up quickly when we stop burning fossil fuels. We saw this during COVID. The air quality responds really fast when we stop burning fossil fuels. A fast-acting policy like the Energy Innovation Act will save lives right away. Another supporting message is air pollution doesn't just kill us, it makes us sick too. This policy will prevent 3.5 million hospital visits, including 50,000 visits from children due to asthma over the next 50 years. These statistics are also from Shindell's work. Air pollution ravages the human body through the air that we breathe, and even before we're born, through the air that our mothers breathe.
And here's another supporting message that you can use for the Saves Lives message. This policy will not only save lives, but it will improve the health in communities of color, which suffer the worst impacts of air pollution, including increased vulnerability to COVID. This is true. And because low-income communities suffer the worst from pollution, they will see the most benefit from this policy. It's a very strong point of agreement when speaking with frontline communities and organizations focused on environmental justice. And I'll touch a little bit more on this soon. Also, this policy will help us be able to work and care for our families. It will restore an estimated 300 million workdays that would otherwise be lost due to air pollution and heat. If you want to translate health into work productivity, here you go. In terms of the political framework, because climate change is taking a toll on human health, many politicians and leaders in the public health community have chosen to give voice to its health implications. Save Lives is a strong talking point for both Republicans and Democrats. For Republicans, instead of referring to a climate change issue, refer to it as a public health issue. Using this framing can help reach an audience that may be usually unengaged because it's hard to ignore the health and safety of constituents. For many Democrats, environmental justice is a huge concern. Low-income neighborhoods and communities of color are among those most at risk to adverse health effects from climate, and these issues have come to the forefront as a main priority. Also, with the COVID-19 pandemic still lingering, public health is more important than ever. Reducing pollution to restore the health of American people and save lives is something that we all can agree on.
Okay, moving on to the next bucket, puts money in your pocket. This policy is affordable for ordinary Americans because it puts money in your pocket. The money collected from the fee is given as a monthly carbon cashback payment to every American to spend with no restrictions. So people in our focus group implicitly understood the idea of a carbon cashback and the idea that they would get a monthly payment and viewed it very favorably.
A supporting message for putting money back into people's pockets is this policy helps financially vulnerable and low and middle income Americans most. From the household impact study, we know that 99% of the least wealthy 20% and 95% of the bottom 60% of Americans will essentially break even or come out financially ahead. And don't worry, we're going to come back to a graph of that in just a bit. So speaking more about the research insight behind this, affordability for Americans, especially those in the lower 40% of income brackets, has always been central to CCL's policy approach. So let's break this down a little bit more. From the 2020 Household Impact Study, we know that returning 100% of the revenues to households as carbon cash back or carbon dividends will protect Americans from rising costs. This study showed that 61% of households and 68% of individuals will receive either the same amount of money back in these carbon dividends as they pay in increased costs or more. And those who benefit are highly correlated with lower income earners. This graph is from the Household Impact Study, and it shows that the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act meets the goal of protecting lower income folks from increasing costs, as almost all of the two lower quintile earners break even or come out ahead as the result of the policy. So again, that adds up to 99% of the least wealthy 20% and 95% of the bottom 60% of Americans breaking even or coming out ahead. And 96% of those in the lowest 20% see more money in carbon cash back than they do in increased costs. The less wealthy you are, the lower your carbon costs are likely to be because you're buying fewer things and traveling less.
Here's another supporting message that you could use. Under this policy, wealthier Americans will be able to manage their costs by adjusting what they buy. Carbon costs are determined by behavior, not income. This is an important messaging point to emphasize from a political perspective as well, which I'll expand on in a little bit.
Okay, and back to our research participants. So we already said that people universally really liked this talking point, and it's really important because it is purely people-focused. People are worried that they're not going to be able to afford a transition to clean energy. They're worried about themselves, they're worried about their friends, their families, their communities, and so having this talking point front and center really helps them understand that they have been thought about. They have a couple key questions. The first is, how many people are going to get the money? So as I mentioned, there's a perspective that a lot of Americans will not be able to afford a transition to clean energy. So it's not just a concern for a small, the lowest income quintile. It really is a concern for kind of average, everyday Americans. The second question folks have is, will the money be enough? And so Sara just covered off on that. And then the last point is anyone going to tell me or place restrictions on how I can spend it? And so that's why we have the no restrictions in the main talking point.
This policy directly helps Americans financially, which makes it politically durable. Additionally, most low-income people will come out ahead thanks to the dividend, which puts money directly into the pockets of low and middle-income households. In order for a policy to be implemented long enough to make changes, it has to be livable. To continue on with this political context, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that few policies are more popular than the $1,400 in stimulus checks that President Joe Biden and Congress moved to approve in their COVID-19 relief packages. A recent poll found an overwhelmingly 90% of Democrats and 64% of Republicans supported these checks. Not to mention, the process of distributing the stimulus checks to every household worked pretty well too, and who doesn't like getting money in their pockets? The COVID-19 stimulus payments were evidence that monthly dividend payments from the Energy Innovation Act could be a successful approach. We know it works and we know it benefits people. The carbon dividend helps to ensure that people are protected because it is literally giving money to the American people. This applies not just for the Energy Innovation Act, for the construction of our supporting asks and the other carbon pricing bills that we support as well. A huge chunk of dividends are all in those bills. Almost always, members of Congress' main concern when it comes to carbon pricing policy is about how a carbon fee might affect consumer costs and the overall impact of their constituents at home. This approach ensures that they're being taken care of. Senator Mitt Romney is proof of this as well, and he has stated that he supports a carbon fee and dividend approach because it helps families and protects people. Also, in a recent op-ed published in Salt Lake City's Desert News, 25 Utah Republicans endorsed carbon fee and dividend as the best way to bring down the greenhouse gas emissions responsible for climate change. 19 of these Republicans are current members of the Utah legislature. They specifically highlighted the dividend as a main component of preference, stating that dividend protects families from the effect of higher energy prices, and that most families should come out financially ahead and they will be rewarded for reducing emissions however they choose. The endorsement adds momentum to the build. This endorsement adds the momentum building to include carbon pricing and climate legislation currently under consideration in Congress. And it demonstrates that this policy can generate supports from all different areas.
Okay. We're going to cover off on some additional messages. So these messages are not front and center on the Energy Innovation Act website, but they are important additional messages because they do resonate with some key audiences. Specifically, you may find yourselves using these when speaking with certain members of Congress, with local leaders and businesses. So you can keep these in your back pocket for when you need them.
All right, so let's start with the additional messages about creating jobs. This additional message is, a carbon price will incentivize innovation by America's businesses, creating millions of new jobs that will transform our economy and put Americans back to work. People are always interested in the effects of climate policy and environmental policy on jobs. So there are lots of experts out there working to estimate the impacts and tell us how this kind of policy would create millions of jobs. The House Select Committee on Climate Change has been using the Energy Innovations Energy Policy Simulator, which supports this. And let's dive a little bit deeper into job creation. The research backs up the fact that a transition to cleaner energy will not only create more American jobs, but better ones. A study out of Berkeley showed that relative to coal, generating energy from wind creates 1.5 times more jobs. From solar thermal creates 2 times more jobs. From photovoltaic solar creates 8 times more jobs. And energy efficiency efforts create 3.5 times more jobs, all per unit of energy. Furthermore, investing in clean energy generates about 3.2 times more U.S. jobs than investing the same amount of money in fossil fuels would, according to research from the Political Economy Research Institute out of UMass Amherst. And if all of that wasn't enough, the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that median hourly wages for clean energy jobs are 25% higher than the national median wage for all jobs. And research from E2, ACORE, which is the American Council on Renewable Energy, and CELI, which is the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, shows that clean energy jobs are more likely to have retirement and health benefits and are more likely to have labor unions than the rest of the private sector.
So from a political perspective, it's important to remember that there are several COVID-19 impacts that we're still recovering from. The rapid ensuing of necessary shutdowns and stay-at-home orders dealt a devastating blow to many businesses and industries. Job losses during the pandemic have hit workers in low-wage occupations particularly hard, and creating more jobs is on the minds of everyone, especially politicians. President Biden's American Jobs Plan has the goal of creating millions of jobs for Americans by investing in research and development, restoring infrastructure, workforce training, and clean energy initiatives. A policy like the Energy Innovation Act aligns really nicely with President Biden's goals. The dividend allows for revenue recycling, which stimulates household spending. And this leads to job surges in areas such as healthcare, retail, construction, information technology, real estate, tourism, and more. This information is also very important for our advocacy because the creation of good quality jobs is of critical importance to our country, especially now. Economic analysis shows, as Sara just showed you, that it makes it clear that a carbon tax will shift jobs to the clean energy economy and provide strong evidence that these new jobs will provide good wages and benefits that are well in excess of the national average and on par with those they are replacing. Opponents may claim that carbon pricing policies are job killers or will harm the economy, but As Sara showed, peer review literature indicates that such policies would have minimal impact on GDP while providing tremendous health and climate benefits and abundant high-quality jobs. These are extremely important takeaways to highlight when you're advocating for support for this policy. Here's another additional message that you could use. Businesses prefer this policy because they remain financially stable while they adjust their operations, thanks to a predictable and gradually rising price on carbon. Similar to the point I was making above in the affordable clean energy messaging, businesses prefer a market-based approach because it is predictable. This is a huge talking point, especially for Republicans. It gives them the flexibility to choose the most economical way to reduce emissions rather than mandating one approach. Pricing also encourages businesses to innovate. Support from businesses helps members of Congress to support this policy, so it's important to keep sharing. And here are some statements of support that you could use. To expand on the US Chamber of Commerce quote, they also said that this policy should include well-designed market mechanisms that are transparent and not distorted by overlapping regulations. US climate policy should recognize the urgent need for action while maintaining the national and international competitiveness of US industry and ensuring consistency with free enterprise and free trade principles. Similarly, the Business Roundtable CEOs are calling for a well-designed market-based mechanism and other supporting policies to provide certainty and unleash innovation to lift America towards a cleaner, brighter future. CEOs of the Roundtable have specifically said that they stay committed to leading by example, and that the US can do the same by adopting a credible and comprehensive climate strategy with market-based solutions to reduce emissions across the economy. Even the American Petroleum Institute endorses an economy-wide price on carbon, calling it the most impactful policy for emissions reductions. They believe the policy should be economy-wide, transparent, non-duplicative, maintain US competitiveness, and focus on net emissions. And all of these statements are huge. They should be shared with your members of Congress or in your advocacy efforts so that they can see the movement growing behind a carbon price.
All right, the next category of additional messages is strong economy. This message is, by 2050, this policy would save Americans over $800 billion each year in economic losses, or over $6,000 per household. This message is backed up by a report from the Swiss Re Institute, which shows that reducing greenhouse gas emissions consistent with the Paris goal of well below 2 degrees Celsius instead of continuing in a business as usual fashion will result in the US GDP being an estimated 2 to 4% higher in 2050 compared to that business as usual scenario. Further, a report from the IMF shows that a carbon fee and dividend policy would also maintain a higher US GDP relative to a business as usual scenario through mid-century and develop a stronger GDP by 2100. Another message under the strong economy umbrella is, this policy is best for America's economy because it's the most efficient way to lower America's pollution. This is supported by a report out of the Climate Leadership Council, which demonstrates that a carbon fee and dividend policy will go further, faster than any other single policy intervention. Another additional message about a strong economy is that this policy protects US manufacturing at home and internationally through a border carbon adjustment. And let's talk a bit about the importance of a border carbon adjustment and the implications of carbon pricing on the global market for the US. The US is falling behind as one of only 2 developed economies without a carbon price, according to the UN and World Bank. A carbon price is increasingly important to help the US remain competitive in the global market. The European Union and Canada, countries that account for 1/3 of our total international trade, have enacted carbon prices and are discussing border carbon adjustments of their own. When the EU announced that they would enforce a border carbon adjustment mechanism by 2023, it inspired meaningful action in other countries, like Russia announced a plan to monitor polluters by 2022 to serve as the basis of an emissions trading system. And China accelerated their deployment of a carbon market. If the US enacts our own carbon price, we can avoid paying fees to other countries when they enact border carbon adjustments and keep the revenues here to benefit Americans. Furthermore, the US has every incentive to get in the game by enacting a strong carbon price with a border carbon adjustment because we have a competitive advantage in low carbon products already. A study by the Climate Leadership Council showed that goods made in the United States are already 80% more carbon efficient than the world average.
From the political point of view, border concerns are extremely relevant right now and of concern. Maintaining American competitiveness is something we hear time and time again in congressional hearings and lobby meetings. And it's important that they are made aware of the disadvantage American companies will be if we do not enact an equivalent price on carbon. I also want to re-highlight that leading economists support a price on carbon. The Economist Statement on Carbon Dividends is a joint statement signed by over 3,500 US economists promoting a carbon dividends framework for US climate policy. They believe that a revenue neutral carbon dividend is good for the economy because it neither increases nor decreases tax revenues when compared to existing law. This is also a great point for conservatives who don't like bigger government, deficit hawks in both parties who don't want more debt, and pragmatics who don't think the government should pick winners and losers. The Energy Innovation Act policy doesn't increase the deficit, and investment decisions are made by investors, and the policy is economically efficient.
Okay, let's take a deep breath. So we have gone through a lot of messaging in just, looks like 37 minutes. That was a lot, right? So thank you for that. We are now going to switch to discussing how to choose the messages that we decide to share with folks. And so the reason we have so many messages is that CCLers are everywhere, talking to all kinds of people, and we need the type of flexibility for messaging that we just laid out. However, we would never use all of these messages at once, like we just did with you here, for fear of completely overwhelming our audience. And so we have some guidelines here about how to pick the messages that we use at any given time. The first one is we really want to limit ourselves to 3 to 4 points. 3 is really optimal. People have trouble grasping on to more than 3 pieces of information. We do have 4 top level talking points, but limit yourself. And then you kind of have to decide, are you going to go broad or are you going to go deep? And so for some audiences, it's appropriate to give more of an overview where you touch on the highest level talking points. Maybe you see what resonates, and you give an introduction to everything that the bill does. For other audiences, it might be more appropriate to go deep. So there are some audiences that have very specific interests that you may already know about, and you might want to dive deep, say into saved lives and just talk about that. Or you might want to dive deep into some of the economic messaging if you're having a conversation where people care about that. And then the last thing is to provide real world evidence of support where you can. And we will share out some of the statements of support. You've seen Morgan sharing them throughout this conversation. It can be really helpful to add in a statement of support with your messaging. We're going to do a little exercise right now together. Oh, Sarah, the slide's not building the way I had intended. So we're going to take 3 use cases. So we'll just take the first one. We're going to consider that we're meeting or speaking for the first time to someone in one of these groups. And let's just figure out, I want you to type into the chat what 3 messages you would lead with for each of these audiences. And so the first audience is talking with a Green New Deal supporter at a tabling event. What would you choose to lead with for when you talk about the Energy Innovation Act? So there are a couple ones that jump to the forefront of my mind. I see a lot of the targets, net zero by 2050 and 50% reduction by 2030. I agree with that. So one thing that we know about folks who support the Green New Deal is that they are really concerned about climate change, right? And they want to drive emissions to zero. And so by communicating our targets, we can enter the conversation with them in a productive way to show them that, we also care about emissions reductions and getting to net zero as fast as possible. I see a lot of Saves Lives. I would also choose Saves Lives, especially the talking point about saving lives in the communities that are the worst impacted by air pollution. So when we reduce carbon pollution, we reduce air pollution by quite a bit. It really does help folks in those communities, and it really is a benefit that our policy works fast, both to reduce carbon pollution, to mitigate the effects of climate change, but also air pollution. So we do want to be emphasizing that. And then I think I see some puts money in your pockets. I might consider that one. Seems like a good one. Yep, lower 2 quintile. So someone raised that that it's good financially for folks in the bottom 2 quintiles. We know that folks that care about the Green New Deal tend to approach climate from a people perspective, right? So we probably wouldn't throw a bunch of economic jargon in here. We would lead with our messaging buckets that focus on people and also effectiveness. I see some jobs in there, so that's interesting as well, because it is true that a transition to clean energy creates some jobs in the clean energy space, but it also creates jobs within those communities. So if you get clean energy jobs, those people have to eat at restaurants and they shop at stores and they consume healthcare. And so all of those things that create a vibrant community or revitalize communities that are no longer vibrant would resonate here. Okay. What if you are speaking with a local small business association? What would you lead with then? Let's talk about drives innovation. So
Chamber support is a good one too.
Yep. So you might pull in the Chamber of Commerce. So, okay, well, let's start with that one. So we have this extra talking point, right? That's business preferred. And so you might lead with that here, right? If you're meeting with small businesses, those businesses don't have resources to be able to hire people to help them interpret complex regulations or understand what it is they need to do to comply with people. In fact, they would like to avoid that, right? So the fact that you can build a price on carbon into your basic business model, like it's in a format that businesses understand. They know how to value it. They know how to incorporate it. It helps them make decisions without being overly complicated. That might be a real talking point. And the fact that the chamber supports it is a great support point. The other one is drives innovation, right? So small businesses are very concerned with a local vibrant economy. Innovation really does help on that front, right? If the solar plant comes to town, you've got a bunch of thriving local businesses. Innovation can come from different economic sectors. And so everyone has a stake in the game, and they can, optimize and improve, and everyone benefits from that. And then maybe the last one is puts money in your pocket. Local businesses might really relate to that. They want, they want to know that the people in their community are going to be able to afford to live and be able to be whole, and so that the community can thrive. So small businesses tend to be very invested in the communities where they're located. Okay, anything else jump into the top of the chat?
I saw someone else, Linda's talking about how the health benefits can reduce downtime for employees. There was that great statistic on avoiding, I think it was 3.5, a lot of hours of downtime from employees.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great one. And then there are jobs. We have the jobs talking point. And so, the jobs talking point really fits in with President Biden's agenda, right? So he has said, when I think of clean energy, I think jobs, and part of those jobs are the clean energy jobs, but there are also the other jobs that come along with it. And so small businesses like to hear that there's going to be plenty of jobs around them. That's more business and a more vibrant economy for them. Okay. And let's move on to the last one. Okay, meeting with the local parent-teacher association. What would you say if you're meeting with a bunch of parents? So here might be a place where you go straight into health and you talk about how air pollution is hurting us. Yep, future jobs. So I see we're all thinking along the same line. So here might be a place where you go deep, right? the parents, the way in for the parents might be, this is going to keep your kids healthier, it's going to make your kids healthier. There is also, right, there's the reduces emissions. And so we are going to tackle this problem so that our kids aren't stuck with something that's uncontrollable for them. Yep. Great. Okay. So since we have some time in this session, are there other circumstances or people who scenarios we might consider that people would like to talk about in the group, even though we're just chatting about it?
I saw earlier someone said something about rural
Rural.
communities. Yeah.
Okay. So let's imagine then that you are meeting with a local elected official in a rural conservative area to talk about the Energy Innovation Act. What would you say? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of money in your pocket. Jobs. Farmers exempt. Yeah, so there are very specific industry things that might come up in a rural scenario. So, obviously you would need to consider that. So, yeah, so health, maybe you wouldn't lead so much with health because there are fewer health impacts unless you're in a rural impacted community, like a extraction community. You probably almost certainly would say money in your pocket, right? So that there is some way that your local community is being addressed.
Jan says vibrant Main Street, which I feel like is an allusion to just another version of the jobs argument.
Right. And, that's a major, I think rural communities really understand that very well, is that, when the coal plant closes down, everybody loses all of their jobs, right? So they've seen that in reverse. And so they really understand that vibrant local economy and how that can fall apart. That might be a point of resonance. No rules on how you spend your dividend. That's right. So there might be a distrust of federal government there, right? So the more we can emphasize that it's a level playing field, that businesses are going to lead the solution, that money goes to local people, that will probably help build trust. All right. Helps crop yields, right? And a lot of rural industries are very affected already by climate change, and so there are always those local impacts that you can bring into the conversation. Oh, interesting. I see someone bringing up the border adjustment. So with manufacturing and certain industry sectors, right, they will be negatively impacted by a border adjustment levied by other countries. They would benefit from a border adjustment of our own with a carbon price. So industry, a lot of our manufacturing sectors would be protected, like steel. Okay. Any other scenarios that we want to consider? Anything else? I think I saw mayors in there. Did someone want to talk about mayors? Okay. Let's pretend that you're meeting with your mayor. What would you say? Maybe you've already met with your mayor. What did you say? Jobs, impacts on municipality. Right. So it depends on the city or town, but mayors want to know that their communities are going to be vibrant, right? So you probably are going to talk about money in your pocket. You might lead with health, depending on where you are, right? How bad is the air pollution in your area? You might even lead with health, even if you are further extended from the air pollution. So there are plenty of communities in California, mine included, where I could imagine leading with the air pollution effects of wildfire smoke on our children. And then that might be a way in, even though that's not a top line level of our messaging, because those impacts haven't fully been studied yet, because they're newer.
Yeah, from Long Beach, California, I would definitely talk about air pollution from the port. So
yeah,
another way to think about that.
Right. Okay, so vibrant communities, jobs. predictability for the businesses, right? So mayors are probably, they're concerned about, are their local businesses going to be able to stay in business, right? So they don't want to be putting anybody out of business. And they're concerned about the folks that live in their town. So health and money in your pocket for the latter, and good for business, you might choose to lead with one of those. Right, concern for energy costs. That is true, right? So if you are a mayor and energy costs in your town go way up, that becomes, you know, a local issue for you. So affordable energy innovation is interesting. Okay, I'm seeing some requests for talking to folks on the left or in sort of frontline or impacted communities. I think I saw a request to talk about meeting with Native American tribes. Okay, let's give that a try. What will we say if we're meeting with Native American tribes? Okay, we're not. Let's see. Jobs, money in pockets, saves lives in your community. So a lot of people are calling out, this is a place where we would listen first, right? And hear what this specific tribe has to say and what their most important points are. But of course, we know that most Native American tribes have tremendous respect for the land that they are on, and you know, we would want to communicate our own respect for life and people. Yep, and there's a little bit of a disconnect here, right? So we have a lot of talking points that are how the economy will work to solve climate change, and there's probably more resistance here to the idea that the economy can work, and so this one is a more challenging one because it does not include the idea that we're going to get rid of capitalism.
Yeah, Jerry brought up a good point that in Maine there's opposition because some don't want to monetize the natural world, and I guess you could see a carbon price as monetizing a natural resource in a different way. So being careful about the way you're presenting this idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I saw in the chat, let's all consider the $1 million possibility, and if anybody could crack this, we could all go home. Which is, what do we say to Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia to get him to support a carbon fee and dividend like the Energy Innovation Act? Jobs. I'm seeing jobs supported by Republicans and Democrats. Yeah, well, so we might choose to, money in your pocket would be a good one. Affordable clean energy would be a good one, although that's a tricky one, right? So West Virginia is, of course, the epicenter of understanding what's happened to the coal industry. Sure, and there would be other things, right, by the way. So Joe Manchin almost certainly would want to have a conversation about reparations or money to impacted families. That is not currently in the Energy Innovation Act. Right, and so taking care of the issue, so solving the problem on a level playing field, business-led is probably in line with something that Joe Manchin would support. Bipartisan. Okay.
I was just going to add, Leslie, that someone made a good point by mentioning Reclaim too. A lot of the supporting carbon pricing bills that CCL does support has a lot of these different aspects that we're mentioning right now. There's, I think the Durbin bill has a huge portion going to environmental justice communities. The White House bill prior had some, and same with the Market Choice Act, I believe, has some transition assistance. And so these are also great examples to use as well, that they're carbon pricing bills that also can provide these sort of provisions for these communities.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so we are going to move on to chat a little bit about making statements of support. leveraging statements of support. So the basic theory here is that let someone else do the heavy lifting for you. So if you happen to have a good statement of support from someone who is relevant to the audience you're speaking for, you can lead with it or use it in a presentation or on social media, and it will work to immediately connect folks to the issues in a new way. So a couple things is that CCL provides our own graphics and videos for use in social media or in presentations. And we really do this for the bigger names. So you will see videos from very well-known people who have spoken about a price on carbon, or in some cases about the Energy Innovation Act. There are also templates that you can use. So you may have a local figure who is not included in CCL's set of pre-made graphics, but if you know that you have someone whose quote is impactful, we have slide templates and Canva templates for social media that you can use to mock your own things up. So I want to show you a little bit. So the type of support we're talking about, we're going to watch a really quick video just to show you kind of the breadth of people that are out there talking about a price on carbon or a carbon tax.
Sarah, you're muted, so I don't think.
Everything else works.
My top recommendation, honestly, would be just to have a carbon tax,
Carbon fee, a carbon tax, carbon pricing, carbon tax, price on carbon. When you put a price on carbon, everything else works.
The United States sets out on the road to cut greenhouse gases in half by the end of this decade. This is the decisive decade. This is the decade we must make decisions that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. Those that do take action and make bold investments in their people, a clean energy future, will win the good jobs of tomorrow and make their economies more resilient and more competitive.
I'm very, very open to a carbon tax, carbon dividend.
some kind of a price on carbon.
Simply to put in place a carbon tax.
Okay, so that's one of the main reasons that we are talking more broadly about a price on carbon or a carbon tax. I want to reiterate that we are not suggesting that all carbon prices or carbon taxes are equal. What we're in fact talking about supporting is a policy like that, which is included in the Energy Innovation Act. But leveraging those statements of support are actually really helpful. People like Elon Musk help start the conversation. No matter what you may personally think of Elon Musk, there are quite a few people that listen to what he says. And so he has helped us get way more attention for a price on carbon simply by leveraging his voice. And so all of our videos about a price on carbon can be found on our YouTube channel. So the easiest thing to do to keep up to date is just to go to CCL's YouTube channel and subscribe. There are a couple specific feeds that you can take a look at. The first is endorsements, and that includes all video endorsements that we have specifically for the Energy Innovation Act. So we have several videos that are for those. And then we also have a carbon pricing is popular feed, which has all of the statements of support or all of the video messages of support for a price on carbon or a carbon tax more generically. You can pick and choose from those videos, see if you find anything that will help you. Okay, and then we have a kit of already prepared graphics in our social media kit. So you can find this on CCL Community. We should have the URL to drop into the chat for you. It's got links to graphics of all sizes, so you can find the size you need depending on where you're planning on putting it. You can drop it into a presentation. You can put it right out on social media. And it also has links to suggested social posts. You can see how CCL National is using these statements of support for a price on carbon in our own social communications. Okay, so that is all of the material that we have prepared in advance for today.